My name is Grace Shimizu from the United States, here to advocate for our families, Nikkei from Latin America, who suffered government-sponsored war crimes and crimes against humanity during World War II. Here's a video about our ongoing struggle for historical truth, justice, and government accountability.
No fences, no guard tower, or, no cottages, so nothing looks familiar. No front gate, didn't leave anything.
Art Shibayama was just 13 years old and living comfortably in Peru when he was forced out of the only home he had ever known. During World War II, the United States government, in collaboration with several Latin American countries, orchestrated the forced removal and internment of over 2,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, which included both citizens of 13 Latin American countries as well as Japanese immigrants. Like young Art Shibayama, the vast majority were Japanese Peruvians. Shortly after the Japanese military attack on Pearl Harbor, community leaders were scapegoated and rounded up for detention throughout the Americas. In Peru, a blacklist had been generated. While not based on any real or credible evidence of Japanese subversive activity, the blacklist targeted businessmen, community leaders, and educators. In collaboration with Peruvian officials, the U.S. used the blacklist as the basis for rounding up hostages. These hostages were then to be traded for Americans held by Japan. Most of the Japanese Latin Americans were interned in a Department of Justice camp at Crystal City, Texas. A 10-foot fence, guard towers, and floodlights surrounded this camp. The camp also held persons of Italian and German ancestry from the United States and Latin America, as well as Japanese Americans.
Barracks, like army barracks, playing.
Though they had lost both their freedom and their homes, most chose to hide their fears of an uncertain future from their children. During the internment, over 800 Japanese Latin Americans were included in 2 prisoner exchanges, which set sail from New York. But for Art and the other internees, their long ordeal did not end with the close of World War II. The remaining Japanese Latin Americans were told that they were illegal aliens and would be deported. And because the Latin American governments initially refused to allow these internees to return, over 1,000 were thus deported to war-devastated Japan.
The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors, surviving Japanese Americans, of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
However, Art was denied justice. Under this law, Japanese Latin Americans were deemed ineligible for redress as they were not U.S. citizens or residents at the time of internment.
It's not like we wanted to come here. We didn't want to come here. We were forced to come here. We were brought here by the government. So how can that be illegal? That don't make sense.
In an effort to call attention to their hidden history and to support efforts for redress, the Campaign for Justice was formed. In response to public pressure, the Department of Justice offered a settlement of only $5,000 each, just 1/4 of the $20,000 redress provided to the Japanese Americans. While supporting the decision of those who accepted the settlement, Art Shibayama, along with several others, chose to opt out of the settlement. He then filed his own lawsuit, preferring to fight for both redress and a full disclosure of the violations committed by the United States during World War II.
Until the crime is over, meaning it has been fully acknowledged and fully compensated, it is ongoing.
Ese es el punto. Ese es el punto que tienen que reconocerlo. Que si quieren ser justos, que sean justos con todo y que reconozcan sus errores.
Despite his efforts, Art was once again denied justice. His case was dismissed in the final months of 2002.
How old were you when you learned of your father's and uncle's wartime experiences? How old were you at that time?
I was approximately 11 years old when I learned the details about how the U.S. government kidnapped, deported, and imprisoned my father and his family.
What did you witness as far as the impact of these experiences on you and your family members?
Myself, I actually, perhaps for the first time in my life, I felt fearful for my own safety. It was actually a personal violation and vulnerability that I had not felt before. And my brother and I were confronted with the harsh reality of racial oppression, and we felt defenseless. But more shocking for me was when I later realized that this feeling or this theme of insecurity ran through my entire family's persona. Suddenly, the words "with liberty and justice for all" that I recited in grade school every morning rang hollow. I wondered how my government could take my family's basic freedoms and human rights away. My father and his family had done nothing wrong. Their only supposed crime was that they were of Japanese descent, and the U.S. government had a needed excuse to take them as hostages to be used in exchange for Americans being held in Japan. Quite honestly, I cannot say that our family has handled the trauma of these wartime experiences very well. There's still a veil of denial, and it still haunts us and still makes us feel angry and frustrated whenever we think of the injustices that our family had to face.
Can you tell the Commission, please, what you witnessed as far as the impact of your grandfather's death following these experiences?
Sure. So tragically, my grandfather died in 1976 at the age of 70. At the time, he was suffering from a severe depression, so it was very sad and upsetting for the entire family. After the Shibayama's deportation from Peru, my grandfather spent the rest of his life trying to regain everything that he had lost in Peru. It wasn't until after my grandfather had already passed that our family really appreciated all that he had gone through as the patriarch of the family. His whole world was actually turned upside down at the hands of the U.S. government. Our hearts break when we think of the tremendous losses and struggles that he was forced to bear, and the shame of not being able to protect his wife and his children from the unspeakable hardships must have weighed heavy on his heart. To this day, my family and I believe that the U.S. government killed my grandfather's spirit. After his capitulation, and from then on, he was never the same man again. Gradually, he became silently entombed in a world of pain and isolation. I only knew him as a shell of his original self, and I just wish that I had shown him more love when I had the chance.
I'm Natsu Saito, Regents Professor Emerita at Georgia State University's College of Law in Atlanta, Georgia. In 2000, 17 years after the case was filed, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights issued its decision in the Shibayama case. This is a groundbreaking opinion that affirms the claims of Japanese Latin Americans who have struggled for justice for over 75 years. In this decision, the IACHR emphasizes that the principles of equality before the law, equal protection, and non-discrimination are among the most basic human rights. These are articulated in the American Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Man, which is binding on all members of the Organization of American States. All states must assure equal protection of the law to all persons regardless of their citizenship or immigration status. The obligation of the U.S. government to provide both access to information about and meaningful material and moral redress for long-standing violations of human rights.
This victory is bittersweet since the decision was not made during my father's lifetime. Needless to say, it is extremely aggravating and disappointing that the U.S. government still has not acknowledged nor provided proper reparations for the war crimes committed against our family and over 2,200 Japanese Latin Americans. We would also like to acknowledge the thousands of men, women, and children of German, Italian, Jewish, and Japanese ancestry from Latin America and the U.S., including U.S. citizens who are imprisoned and used in the hostage exchanges. Until there is proper redress and justice, these crimes against humanity are ongoing.
While Japanese Americans were granted monetary redress with the passage of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, the Shibayama brothers were denied access because they were neither citizens or permanent residents. The human rights finding, however, evoked the principle of equality before the law in recognizing that the Shibayama brothers were in fact deprived of their human rights. And in fact, their status as illegal immigrants was created by the politics of war, the racist policies, and blatant indifference to their humanity. May we pledge our solidarity moving forward to their next steps on that path towards justice.
I'm thrilled by this long-awaited ruling by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in recognizing the experiences of Japanese Latin American incarcerees during World War II. As someone who has benefited from reparations for World War II mass incarceration, I'm urging the United States government to provide redress and reparations for Japanese Latin Americans and their descendants, as was given to my family. We cannot stop at apologies, but instead must begin to build something better, so that these systems of incarceration are completely removed from our communities and ways of being.
Congratulations to Art Shibayama and all the members of the Japanese Latin American community. And why does this matter to all of us? Well, I believe it's because if we don't stand up to declare that this cannot happen again, chances are it will. I was born and raised in Fukuoka, Japan as a Zainichi Korean. I know firsthand that if you don't have the opportunity to exercise your birthright, to tell your own story on your own terms, then you can easily be made a victim of a grave violation in the name of state interest. And that is what happened to the Shibayama brothers and many of their colleagues. We must stand in solidarity with other people who are fighting to reclaim their human dignity.
My family and I were among thousands of German ethnic families, legal residents of Latin America and the Caribbean who were swept into local detention camps, were held without hearings or legal recourse, and over 4,000 of us were brought to the United States for internment and potential exchange. And in the United States, the government deemed more than 300,000 residents, German-born residents of the United States, enemy aliens. Feared collectively because of our German ethnicity, our civil liberties were abused by the United States government. We were not included in the Civil Rights Act of 1988, and Congress has never acknowledged the civil rights violations that we endured. Similar indiscriminate presumptions are being made today. Ethnicity, religion, nationality, or appearance is not enough to declare whole groups of people unwelcome in the United States. Our government needs to look at the past and learn from it.
Well, we have much to do to see that justice is truly done in this case. I think it really is an inspiration after these many years to finally have this ruling. I think it's all the more important today in light of the human rights violations that we face internationally at the intersection of foreign and economic policies, migration, situations at borders played out against a framework of racism and xenophobia. The horrific conditions faced by a whole class of Japanese Latin Americans, the situations of detention, the manipulation of immigration laws, the barriers to citizenship and access to justice, the rampant discrimination, all of these are episodes and themes that are played out in the United States and around the world, and especially in situations of forced migration in the current era of global migration. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this case, from the experience.
This case, thus, has wide-ranging meaning for Italian Americans who 600,000 of them were likewise targeted as foreign nationals, though they had chosen to live in the U.S., denied the ability to complete their citizenship process, and then denied the rights guaranteed in the Constitution to all U.S. residents, citizens, and non-citizens alike. In the face of the federal government's continuing refusal to accept the consequences of its wartime violations and of its current violations, which continue a similar pattern with regard to other immigrant groups of different ethnic origins, this reading by the IACHR takes on additional relevance. We hope this decision will lead to both a greater understanding by the public of the violations that took place during World War II, and also of what should be the policy of the United States toward asylum seekers and immigrants, and indeed of the poor and neglected in our own underserved communities, now and in the future.
They can call kidnapped Japanese Latin Americans illegal aliens, then that should show us how arbitrary legal status is. It should make us look twice today when the government rails against undocumented and DACA as illegal. Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice delayed is justice denied. Without reparations for Art, our victory is still not complete. In Art's memory and in his honor, we demand reparations for the Japanese Latin Americans.
Our objective is U.S. government compliance with the legal decision of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We want to meet with President Biden's administration for executive action to honor and comply with the Commission's decision. We want to work with the U.S. Congress for legislative action to secure meaningful redress and reparation. We will continue our work with international human rights institutions and organizations to hold the U.S. government accountable for effective compliance. We will also mobilize our former internees and families, supporters, and the public for education and redress action. And we will build solidarity among our communities, locally, nationally, and internationally, by making connections with our histories and justice struggles.